The Last Stand. The burning wreckage of Krix's battlecruiser carved a blazing trail through Earth's atmosphere. Warning signals blared through his neural interface as the ship's systems failed one by one. The battle above had been devastating. The last desperate push of the Varelian fleet against Earth's orbital defenses. Now, as his ship plummeted toward the surface, Commander Krix Vossaren realized he would likely be the last Varelian warrior to die in this senseless war. External cameras showed pieces of his ship's hull peeling away like burning leaves. The battle replayed in his mind. The massive human fleet emerging from behind Earth's moon, their weapons technology far more advanced than Varelian intelligence had suggested. His people had attacked Earth believing humans to be primitive savages who had somehow stumbled upon spaceflight. That misconception had cost them everything. Krix's four-fingered hands danced across the control interface, trying to stabilize the descent. His gray-scaled skin reflected the red emergency lights as he fought with the failing systems. The ship's artificial gravity flickered and died, leaving him floating momentarily before the planet's natural gravity took hold. Through the view screen, he watched the ground approaching rapidly. Final recording. He spoke into the ship's log, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. I, Commander Krix Vossaren of the Varelian Imperial Fleet, face my end with honor. May the ancestral lights guide my spirit home. The words felt hollow ritual phrases that had lost their meaning after 15 years of war. The impact came faster than expected. Metal screamed against Earth, and Krix's world became a blur of pain and motion. When consciousness returned, he found himself pinned beneath twisted metal, his environment suit breached in multiple places. Earth's atmosphere wasn't immediately toxic to Varelians, but extended exposure would eventually prove fatal. Through the shattered view screen, Krix could see an Earth forest, trees swaying in the wind. It seemed peaceful, almost beautiful. Nothing like the wasteland his military briefings had described. His neural interface was still functioning, though barely, and it reported multiple severe injuries. Without medical attention, he had perhaps 6 hours to live. He tried to move but stopped when white-hot pain shot through his body. His lower left arm was definitely broken, and something had punctured his side. Purple blood, bright against his gray scales, dripped steadily onto the crashed ship's deck. The same deck where, just hours ago, he had stood proudly commanding his crew of 200. All dead now, sacrificed in a war he was beginning to question. Military sensors, still partially functional, detected approaching vehicles. Human vehicles. Krix reached for his sidearm with his functioning right arm, checking its charge. Only enough power for 2 shots. In Varelian military doctrine, those 2 shots were meant for a specific purpose, ensuring captured warriors couldn't be interrogated. 1 shot for any approaching enemy, 1 for himself. The vehicles were getting closer. Krix could hear their engines now, along with human voices calling out to each other. His training said to end it quickly. Humans were savages who tortured their prisoners, or so every Varelian warrior was taught from their first day of training. Yet something made him hesitate. Through the broken view screen, he saw them approaching. Humans in protective gear, moving cautiously but purposefully. They carried equipment he didn't recognize, but their weapons remained holstered. This wasn't the approach of warriors coming to finish off an enemy. This was something else entirely. Life signs detected. A female human voice called out, "Prep the xenomedical kit." Krix's translator, still functioning, converted the words. Xenomedical. They were coming to help. His arm tensed on the weapon, years of training warring with his observations. Everything he'd been taught said humans were bloodthirsty monsters who had rejected all peace offerings. Yet here they were, approaching with medical equipment rather than weapons. A human face appeared at the broken view screen. A female, her expression visible through her clear protective mask. Her eyes met his, and Krix saw something he never expected. Concern. Not hatred, not the savage bloodlust he'd been trained to expect, but genuine worry for his well-being. "Hold on," she said clearly, making sure his translator could pick up her words. "We're going to get you out of there. I'm Lieutenant Hayes, And we're here to help. Crix's grip on his weapon loosened. The second human face that appeared belonged to a medic, already scanning him with sophisticated medical equipment. These humans, these supposed savages, were trying to save his life despite 15 years of brutal war between their species. As his consciousness began to fade, Crix made a decision that would change not only his life, but the future of both species. He let the weapon fall from his hand. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Lieutenant Hayes directing her team with calm efficiency, working to save the life of someone who, just hours ago, had been trying to destroy her world. His final thought was a question that would haunt him in the days to come. How much of what his people believed about humans was wrong? And if they were wrong about this, what else had they been wrong about? Unexpected mercy. Lieutenant Jessica Hayes stood at the observation window of the Xenomedical Containment Unit, watching their alien patients' vital signs on the holographic display. 3 days had passed since they'd pulled the Varalian commander from his crashed ship, and he'd spent most of that time in an induced coma while their medical team worked to save his life. The decision to help him had been instantaneous for her team, but not everyone at the base shared their humanitarian perspective. The brass is breathing down my neck about this one. Hayes. Director Thomas Richardson appeared beside her, his weathered face reflecting the blue glow of the medical monitors. Half of them want to throw him in a military prison. The other half want to interrogate him for intelligence. He paused, studying the unconscious alien. Convincing them to let us treat him as a patient rather than a prisoner wasn't easy. He's a soldier, sir, just like us, Hayes replied, checking the latest medical readings. The fact that he chose not to take his own life or attack us speaks volumes. Standard Varalian military protocol calls for suicide over capture. He made a different choice. Inside the containment unit, their patient's gray-scaled chest rose and fell steadily. The medical team had repaired his broken arm and the puncture wound in his side, but his unusual physiology had presented numerous challenges. Dr. Patel, their xenobiologist, had worked tirelessly to adapt human medical procedures to Varalian biology. A slight change in the patient's brainwave patterns caught Hayes' attention. "He's waking up," she announced, already moving toward the airlock. Director Richardson caught her arm. "Are you sure you want to be in there when he regains consciousness? He's still a Varalian commander." Hayes gently pulled free. "That's exactly why I need to be there. First impressions matter, sir, especially now." After going through decontamination, Hayes entered the containment unit. The room was kept at slightly higher pressure and temperature to match Varalian physiological preferences. She approached the bed just as the patient's eyes began to open. All three of them. The third eye in the center of his forehead, focusing on her independently of the other two. "Commander Voserin," she spoke clearly, knowing his translator implant would convert her words. "You're in a medical facility. You're safe." The Varalian commander's eyes darted around the room, taking in the medical equipment and the observation window where Director Richardson still stood. His muscles tensed, but he remained still, clearly assessing the situation. "Why?" His voice was rough, but the translator rendered it clearly in English. "Why treat an enemy commander?" Hayes pulled up a chair, maintaining a respectful distance. "Because that's what we do. Because every sentient being deserves care when they're injured. Because this war has seen enough death." Crix Voserin struggled to sit up, and Hayes resisted the urge to help him. She understood that for a Varalian warrior, maintaining dignity was crucial. "Our intelligence said humans were savages," he said, each word careful and measured. "That you rejected every attempt at peaceful contact. That you would torture any captured warriors for information." Hayes couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Funny. We were told the exact same thing about Varalians, that you rejected all diplomatic overtures, that you attacked without provocation, that you tortured prisoners." For the first time, she saw uncertainty flicker across the commander's alien features. "That's not possible," he said, but his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself. "The High Command showed us the records. Your ships fired on our first contact vessel. You destroyed our peace envoys. No, Hayes said quietly. Your ships fired on us. We lost 3 diplomatic vessels in the first month alone. All of them destroyed while broadcasting peace messages on all frequencies. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Hayes could see the commander processing this information, his third eye focusing intently on her face, as if searching for any sign of deception. The medication we used to keep you stable while we treated your injuries has some interesting side effects, Hayes continued. It temporarily suppresses the neural blocker all Varelian military personnel have implanted. The one that's supposed to prevent captured soldiers from revealing military secrets. She paused, letting that sink in. You've been here for 3 days. If we wanted to interrogate you, we could have done it while you were unconscious. We didn't. Crix's hands gripped the edges of his medical bed. If what you say is true, he stopped, his voice catching. If what you say is true, then millions have died because of a lie. But why? Who would benefit from this war? Hayes stood slowly. That's the question, isn't it? Our analysts have been asking the same thing for years. Now that you're awake, maybe we can find the answer together. She moved toward the door, but paused. Oh, and Commander. The medical team has some questions about Varelian biology when you're feeling up to it. Dr. Patel had to get rather creative with your treatment. He'd appreciate knowing if he got everything right. As she left the containment unit, Hayes could feel the commander's eyes following her. Through the observation window, she saw him looking down at his healed wounds, then at the advanced medical equipment surrounding him. His expression was one she'd seen before on soldiers' faces, the look of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically dismantled. Director Richardson was waiting for her. Well, he's questioning everything he thought he knew, Hayes replied. That's a start. She checked her tablet, reviewing the day's schedule. Now we just have to hope both sides give us enough time to find the truth before this war claims any more lives. Through the window, they watched as Dr. Patel entered the room to begin his examination, and Commander Voserin, after a moment's hesitation, began to answer his questions about Varelian physiology. It was a small step, but in a war built on lies, even small steps toward truth mattered. Breaking barriers. 2 weeks into his recovery, Commander Crix Voserin sat in what the humans called the recreation room, a space they had modified to accommodate his physiological needs. The room's temperature was kept at a warm 30 degrees Celsius, and the lighting had been adjusted to the softer spectrum that suited Varelian eyes. He was examining a tablet filled with historical records from both sides of the war, comparing them with growing unease. Lieutenant Hayes entered, carrying 2 containers. She handed him one filled with a specially prepared nutrient solution that matched Varelian dietary requirements. For herself, she had what she called coffee, a stimulant that humans seemed to depend on with almost religious devotion. Find anything interesting? She asked, settling into a chair designed to accommodate human posture. Too much, Crix replied, his third eye focusing on the tablet while his other 2 eyes watched Hayes. These records, they don't match, not just in small details, but in fundamental ways. He set down the tablet, his scaled hands trembling slightly. According to our history, humans destroy our first contact vessel over your moon. But your records show no human ships were even in that sector when the destruction occurred. Hayes nodded, sipping her coffee. We've noticed similar discrepancies. Every major incident that escalated the war has contradicting records. It's as if someone wanted this war to happen. Crix finished. But who? And why? Before Hayes could respond, Dr. Patel burst into the room, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. Commander, Lieutenant, you need to see this. He rushed to the room's main display screen and pulled up a series of complex molecular diagrams. What are we looking at, Doctor? Hayes asked, setting down her coffee. The neural blocker, Patel explained, highlighting various parts of the diagram. The one all Varelian military personnel have implanted. I've been analyzing its structure since it was temporarily deactivated by our treatment protocols. He paused, glancing at Crix. Commander, it's not just a neural blocker. It's also a transmission device. Crix stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. That's impossible. The blocker is purely defensive, to prevent captured warriors from revealing military secrets. That's what you were told, Paddle said gently. But look at these components. They're capable of receiving and transmitting signals. Subtle ones. But he trailed off, seemingly reluctant to continue. But what? Hayes pressed. But they could influence thoughts, emotions, especially those related to specific triggers, like humans, for instance. Patel looked directly at Crix. Commander, your entire military has been subjected to low-level behavioral modification through these implants. The room fell silent. Crix sank back into his chair, his scaled skin paling slightly. How many? He whispered. How many of my people have these devices? Based on the military records you've shared, Paddle replied. Every Varelian warrior inducted in the past 20 years. Hayes watched as Crix processed this information. His hands clenched and unclenched, a Varelian sign of deep distress. My entire crew, he said finally. Everyone who died in that last battle. We all had these implants. We all. He stopped, his voice catching. We never questioned why we hated humans so deeply. We'd never wondered why peace was impossible. We just knew it was. The same entity that orchestrated the false flag attacks must have provided the implant technology, Hayes reasoned. But who has that kind of advanced tech? And what do they gain from keeping our species at war? Crix's third eye suddenly widened, a sign of revelation in Varelians. The Syndicate, he said. The weapons dealers who supply both sides through neutral intermediaries. They claim to be a coalition of independent traders, but... He grabbed the tablet, fingers flying over its surface. Look at these shipping records. Every time peace seemed possible, every time either side considered negotiations, there was an incident. And after each incident, massive weapons purchases, Hayes finished, looking at the data. They've been profiting from this war for 20 years. Not just profiting, Patel added. Based on this implant technology, they'd been orchestrating it. Keeping it going by ensuring neither side would trust the other. Crix stood again, but this time more slowly, purposefully. I need to contact the Varelian High Command. They need to know about the implants, about the manipulation. My neural blocker is deactivated. They'll have to believe me when they see I'm speaking freely, without coercion. It won't be that simple, Hayes cautioned. The Syndicate will have contingencies. They won't let 20 years of profit slip away easily. Then we'll need help, Crix said, turning to face both humans. From both sides. People we can trust. His third eye focused on Hayes. You saved my life when you had every reason not to. You showed me truth when lies were easier. Will you help me end this war? Hayes smiled, standing to face him. I thought you'd never ask, Commander. Dr. Patil cleared his throat. The medical team is at your disposal as well. We'll need solid evidence to convince both governments, and we'll need to find a way to safely deactivate those implants in other Varelian soldiers. Crix nodded, his posture straightening into what Hayes now recognized as his commander's stance. Then we have work to do. The Syndicate has spent 20 years building this war. His eyes met Hayes. Let's see how long it takes 3 species working together to end it. As they began planning, none of them noticed Director Richardson watching through the room's window, a slight smile on his face as he sent a heavily encrypted message. Phase 1 complete. The bridge between species has been built. Proceeding to Phase 2. The hidden truth. The secure communication bunker hummed with tension as Commander Crix Vossaren prepared to make contact with the Varelian High Command. Lieutenant Hayes stood beside him, while Dr. Patel monitored the neural readings to ensure the transmission wouldn't trigger any hidden protocols in the deactivated implant. Signals ready, Hayes announced, checking the encrypted channel. We're routing through 7 different relays to mask our location. The Syndicate won't be able to track this. Crix took a deep breath, his scaled fingers hovering over the communication panel. Assuming they don't already have infiltrators in high command. That's why we're simultaneously sending the evidence to both military and civilian leadership, Hayes reminded him, along with the technical specifications of the implants. The communication screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of High Commander Vexterra, her silver scales marking her advanced age. Her 3 eyes widened at the sight of Crix standing next to a human. Commander Voserin. She spoke in Varelian, though Hayes' translator rendered it in English. We thought you dead in the Earth assault. Explain your current situation. High Commander, Crix responded formally. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything we believe about this war. He began explaining, detailing his rescue, the discovery of the implants, and the evidence of the Syndicate's manipulation. As he spoke, another alert flashed on their screens. Director Richardson's voice came through the intercom. We've got company. Multiple ships just dropped out of hyperspace. Syndicate signatures. They must have had a deeper surveillance network than we detected, Hayes muttered, moving to the tactical display. 3 capital ships, dozens of fighters. They're not even trying to hide their identity anymore. High Commander Vexterra's expression had grown increasingly troubled as she reviewed the evidence. These implant specifications, our medical division confirmed their existence in all our troops 10 minutes ago. We've begun emergency deactivation procedures. She looked directly at Hayes. Lieutenant, I'm sending you encrypted coordinates. A joint emergency session of human and Varelian leadership has been arranged. The Syndicate's deception ends today. Suddenly, the building shook with the impact of weapon fire. They're targeting the communication array, Patel shouted, gripping his console for stability. Get to the secure bunker, Richardson ordered over the intercom. We've got reinforcements inbound, but you need to protect that evidence. As they rushed through the corridors, Hayes' tactical tablet lit up with new information. The Syndicate ships are deploying ground forces. They're not just trying to silence us. They want to capture us. The implant research must be too valuable to destroy. They reached the bunker just as the first explosion rocked the upper levels. Crix helped Patel secure the servers containing their evidence, while Hayes coordinated with the base's defense forces. More ships dropping out of hyperspace, Hayes announced, then smiled. But these ones are ours. And yes, Varelian signatures too. The joint fleet is here. Through the bunker's small window, they could see the sky light up with weapon fire as human and Varelian ships engaged the Syndicate forces together for the first time in history. On the tactical display, the coordinate data from High Commander Vexterra blinked steadily. The real question, Patel said, still working to secure their data, is how deep does the Syndicate's influence go? These implants aren't their only technology. They've been manipulating both our species for decades. Which means they have other operations, Crix concluded. Other wars they're profiting from. Other species they're keeping in conflict. A massive explosion above made them all duck. When they looked up, Richardson had entered the bunker, his uniform covered in dust. The joint fleet is pushing them back, but we've got ground forces incoming. We need to get you and that evidence to those coordinates. The Syndicate will expect us to run, Crix said, his military training evident in his tactical assessment. They'll have forces waiting along any escape route. Hayes smiled, the kind of smile that Crix had learned meant she had an idea. Then let's do something they won't expect. She turned to Richardson. Sir, how many of those new prototype stealth shuttles do we have? 3, Richardson replied, then understood her plan. Ah, they can't intercept what they can't track. And they can't predict which shuttle has the real evidence and personnel if we send all 3, Crix added, appreciating the strategy. They worked quickly, copying their data across 3 secure drives. As they prepared to split up, Crix turned to Hayes. I never expected to trust a human with my life, he said. Now I'm trusting you with the future of both our species. Hayes clasped his arm in the traditional Varelian warrior's gesture. And I never expected an alien commander to become one of our best hopes for peace. Funny how things work out. Above them, the battle raged between former enemies now turned allies against a common foe. As they prepared to board their separate shuttles, all of them knew that reaching the coordinates was just the beginning. The Syndicate's influence spread far beyond one war, and they had only scratched the surface of the truth. But for the first time in 20 years, humans and Varelians were fighting side by side instead of against each other. And that, Crix reflected as he boarded his shuttle, was a victory that no amount of manipulation could undo. Bridge between worlds. The 3 stealth shuttles screamed through the atmosphere, their experimental cloaking systems rendering them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Inside the lead shuttle, Commander Crix Voserin monitored the tactical display as Lieutenant Hayes piloted through a storm of anti-aircraft fire. Dr. Patel worked frantically in the rear compartment, analyzing new data streaming in from both human and Varelian forces about the Syndicate's neural implants. Multiple bogies, 3 o'clock. Crix called out. Syndicate interceptors. Hayes banked the shuttle hard, diving beneath the cloud cover. They're firing blind. They don't know which shuttle has the real evidence. Her hands danced across the controls with practiced precision. How are the other shuttles doing? Shuttle 2 is maintaining course. Shuttle 3. Crix paused, his third eye narrowing. Shuttle 3 just went dark. Richardson. Static crackled over the comm before Richardson's voice came through. We're hit but alive. Emergency landing protocols engaged. Don't break course. We'll hold them here. Above them, the space battle had intensified. The joint human-Varelian fleet was pushing back the Syndicate forces, but the enemy's technological superiority was evident in every exchange. On the tactical display, Crix watched as ships that had been firing at each other just weeks ago now coordinated their attacks against a common enemy. New data coming in. Patel called from the rear. I've isolated the transmission frequency the Syndicate uses to control the neural implants. If we can broadcast a shutdown signal on this frequency. The shuttle rocked with a near miss. Hayes corrected their course, skimming dangerously close to the terrain. We need to reach that meeting first. No point in having the solution if we can't deliver it to both governments. Crix's displays suddenly lit up with new contacts. More ships dropping out of hyperspace. His heart sank as he counted the signatures. At least 30 Syndicate capital ships. But Hayes was smiling. Look again, Commander. Those aren't all Syndicate ships. Crix focused his third eye on the tactical data and felt a surge of hope. Mixed in with the Syndicate vessels were ships of various designs. Some he recognized, others completely alien to him. Other species. They're all species the Syndicate has been manipulating. Looks like we weren't the only ones putting the pieces together, Hayes said. The Syndicate's been playing the same game across multiple worlds. Now their victims are uniting. The coordinates they were heading toward turned out to be a massive underground facility, hidden beneath what looked like an abandoned mining complex. As their shuttle landed, they were met by an unprecedented gathering of military and civilian leaders from both species, along with representatives from the other races that had joined the battle above. High Commander Vexterra stepped forward as they disembarked. Commander Voserin, Lieutenant Hayes, Dr. Patel, your evidence has already begun changing everything. The deactivation of the neural implants is spreading through our forces. The lies are falling away. But the Syndicate still has technological superiority, a human general added. They've been hoarding advanced tech for decades, keeping the rest of us fighting each other while they profit and grow stronger. Not anymore, Patel said, connecting his data terminal to the facility's systems. We now understand how their control systems work. And more importantly, he gestured to the gathered representatives of other species. We're no longer working alone. The next hours were a blur of activity as military forces coordinated their efforts and scientists from multiple species collaborated on countering Syndicate technology. Crix found himself working alongside beings he would never have imagined meeting, all united by their shared manipulation at the hands of the Syndicate. The final battle that followed would be remembered in the histories of a dozen worlds. As the combined fleet engaged the Syndicate's forces, Patel's shutdown signals spread through their networks, disabling not just the neural implants but numerous other control systems the Syndicate had secretly installed in their weapons and ships. Standing on the command deck with Hayes, watching the Syndicate's carefully constructed web of manipulation collapse, Crix reflected on how far they'd come from that crashed ship where he'd nearly ended his own life rather than trust a human. "What happens now?" he asked Hayes as the last Syndicate ship surrendered. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Now comes the hard part. Building trust between species who've been taught to hate each other. Establishing real peace, not just an absence of war." "It won't be easy," Crix agreed. "There will be those on both sides who cling to the old hatreds, who won't accept change." "Then it's a good thing they'll have us to show them it's possible," Hayes replied. "A Varillian commander and a human lieutenant, working together to save both our peoples. If we can bridge that gap, anything's possible." She took it, smiling. To the future, and to unexpected friendships. Above them, the stars shone on a galaxy that suddenly seemed a lot smaller and a lot more hopeful than it had just weeks before. The bridge between worlds had been built, and though the path forward would not be easy, they would walk it together.